Thanks. Thanks for having me here, Sophia. And thanks for coming for this talk. My name is Kai-Chun. I will talk about post-quantum Wireguard today. And this is a joint work of 5 of us. Before we start, I would like to introduce a bit of my company. I work as a cryptography engineer at the Chief Information Security Office of KPN. It's a telecommunication company in the Netherlands. On the left-hand side, it's a picture of one of our offices. It looks kind of like a scene in those sci-fi movies. On the right-hand side is a picture of our headquarters in Rotterdam. It's not far away from water, so you can probably see why we're not super excited about rising sea levels. Okay, and now I would like to give you an overview about what we are going to talk about today. First, I will introduce the original Wireguard, including its particle, security properties, and its limited resistance to quantum attacks. And then we will move on to post-quantum Wireguard. We will discuss our design rationale, how the final protocol looks like, and what were the challenges to achieve certain desirable post-quantum security properties, and how we solved them. And after that, I would talk about how we instantiated the post-quantum Wireguard protocol, in particular the choice of the long-term CAM and the ephemeral CAM. And finally, I will discuss how we implemented our instantiation and compare its performance with widely used VPN software. And I will show the results. Let me see. Okay, let's start. The original Wireguard is a VPN protocol. It's running on top of UDP packets. It was presented by Donenfeld at NDSS 2017 and was merged into the mainline Linux kernel in 2020. And recently, there's an open source Windows kernel implementation that has been published. And one noticeable design choice of Wireguard is that it's cryptographically opinionated. There is no negotiation phase of the protocol, and it only supports one crypto suite. And because there's no negotiation phase of the protocol, it consists of only 2 phases. It has a handshake phase and a transport phase. So during the handshake phase, the symmetric keys are derived and are used to secure the actual data exchange during the transport phase. And because the transport phase is secure with a symmetric cipher, whose resistance to quantum attacks can be easily boosted by raising the key size, we can focus on the handshake. And consequently, for the rest of this talk, when I say Wireguard protocol, I will be referring only to the handshake part. And Wireguard uses X25519 key pair as a long-term key identity of a party in the handshake. And it makes an assumption about how the public part of the key pair is distributed. In particular, it assumes that before 2 parties start the handshake protocol, they have exchanged their long-term public keys in an out-of-band and authenticated manner. And this is a realistic assumption because this is usually how VPN software is deployed in reality. And one thing notable is that the public keys are not assumed to be secrets. The core of the Wireguard protocol is a chaining key material, which is fed into a KDF to derive the final symmetric keys at the end of the handshake. This chaining key material essentially mixes 4 shared Diffie-Hellman results, and those shared results are computed during the handshake. As mentioned earlier, each party has a long-term X25519 key pair. In the figure below, they are marked with the blue color. On the top left, you could see the long-term key pair of the initiator. You could think of the initiator of a handshake as the client. And on the top right, it's the long-term key pair of the responder. And both parties generate one ephemeral X25519 key pair, and they are marked yellow here in this figure. And the 4 valid combinations of those 4 key pairs are mixed into the chaining key material, and they are static, 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 ephemeral, ephemeral, static, and ephemeral, ephemeral. Okay, and this figure shows how the protocol works in action. So first, you have the initiator, Alice. She generates a fresh ephemeral X25519 key pair, and she sends the ephemeral public key to the responder Bob. After the responder receives it, he generates also a fresh ephemeral X25519 key pair, and he sends back the ephemeral public key. And because both of them have each other's long-term public key already, they could compute the 4 Diffie-Hellman shared secrets. And now we know the protocol, so we can discuss its security properties. A Wireguard protocol is authenticated, so it has some basic security requirements, including a key confidentiality, which means that the derived symmetric key should be indistinguishable from random for anyone else other than the initiator and the responder. In addition, by including Diffie-Hellman results from the ephemeral key pair, it achieves perfect for secrecy. And we also need key uniqueness. It would be a funny situation if two VPN connections somehow have the same encryption keys. And what this means for Wireguard in practice is that the final derived symmetric keys should be unique with overwhelming probability. And of course, both parties will need to know for sure who they are talking to. So they should authenticate each other. And Wireguard in some sense should be considered as a 1.5 RTT protocol, because after the handshake, only the initiator can be certain that the responder has derived the same keys. In other words, authenticated. The knowledge of the final symmetric keys is confirmed by the second handshake packets, which comes from the responder back to the initiator. On the other hand, the responder cannot be sure that the initiator has derived the same final symmetric keys. He knows for sure that only the legitimate initiator can derive the same symmetric keys, but he doesn't know if she has derived them or not. And because of this, the responder cannot authenticate the initiator until he received the first encrypted data packet from the initiator. And this, because this encrypted data packet demonstrates the knowledge of the symmetric keys. Consequently, it serves implicitly as the key confirmation for the responder. As we'll see shortly, this implicit key confirmation will become quite a sore spot for proving the security of Wireguard. And the creator of Wireguard noted this problem in his paper, and he said basically the responder should not send any encrypted data back until he receives the first data packets from the initiator. And those are the basic properties. And with those basic properties covered, we can move on to more extra stuff. So Wireguard also provides additional security properties. For example, identity hiding. What this means is that the identity of the initiator and the responder are not leaked from the protocol level. We should, however, keep in mind that the identities can still be leaked from, for example, IP addresses. And it also prevents replay attack by including a timestamp in the first handshake packet. The second handshake packet cannot be replayed anyway because it's generated upon receiving the first handshake packet, therefore bound to it. And besides that, Wireguard also offers the resistance to unknown key share attacks. In fact, it's immune to this type of attacks. Unknown key share attacks aims to trick two honest parties into completing the handshake with each other, while believing that they have in fact completed the handshake with someone else. It's important that those two honest parties derive the same keys. Let's take one attack scenario as an example. Imagine that you are making an online transaction, and the two honest parties will be you and your bank. The goal of the attacker is to trick the bank into believing that the attacker made the payment while you are the one footing the bill. And obviously, you and your bank will still need to share the same keys, otherwise the transaction cannot go through. And if one of those honest parties is tricked, then the attack is unilateral. If both are tricked, then it's bilateral. The Wireguard prevents both. But one easy way to prevent a non-key share attack is to simply mix the identities of both parties into the final session keys. And Wireguard doesn't do this. Instead, it mixes the Diffie-Hellman results of the long-term key pairs into the chaining key material. And as we'll see in a bit, this design choice will have some consequences when we migrate to the post-quantum world. And finally, Wireguard provides to some extent denial of service, DOS mitigation. What mitigation means here is that the responder will authenticate incoming handshake packets and stop processing it immediately if the authentication fails. So you save computation cycles. The authentication is done with the help of the Diffie-Hellman results of the long-term key pairs too. I will emphasize that this is the only option here because the first handshake packet comes from the initiator. And at this point, no packet has been exchanged. So there's no shared secret between them other than the Diffie-Hellman results of their long-term keys. The pre-share key is optional, so it may not always be available. And relying on the Diffie-Hellman result for DOS mitigation means that we have one more thing to fix when we migrate to post-quantum cryptography. Okay, and some of the security properties have been proven. Dowling and Peterson gave a computational security proof for Wireguard in the so-called ECK PFS PSK model. And basically, ECK is a model that defines what security notions that we should consider and the capabilities of the attacker. And here, PFS and PSK means that the original ECK model is extended to take the notion of perfect forward secrecy and pre-share key into consideration. And recall that we mentioned earlier that implicit key confirmation of Wireguard is a source, but it turns out it's difficult to reason the security of Wireguard because the handshake phase and the transport phase are not clearly separated. So what Dowling and Peterson did was they add a key confirmation to the Wireguard handshake, and they prove the security of Wireguard in this tweaked version of the protocol. And their proof covers many security properties, but not key uniqueness, not identity hiding, and DOS mitigation. And Donenfeld and Milner have also proven some security properties of Wireguard in the symbolic model. So unlike the computational model we just talked about, the symbolic model assumes idealized crypto building blocks. In other words, perfect cryptography. For example, it's not possible to decrypt the key, to decrypt the ciphertext without the key. And the attacker has no advantages to learn part of the plaintext. Well, the computational model is more realistic, its proof is more complicated, and it was not automated until recent years. I will also emphasize that the computational model doesn't take some important aspects into consideration, for example, side channel attacks. And so it's not perfect either. On the other hand, by abstracting crypto building blocks, symbolic model can be better automated and has played an important role in discovering logic flows and attacks in, for example, TLS 1.3 and the 5G protocol. So Donenfeld and Milner proved some security properties of Wireguard, but they did not prove perfect forward secrecy, they did not prove replay attack resistance and DOS mitigation. Okay, and the original Wireguard protocol provides optionally post-quantum key confidentiality with a pre-share key. The idea is very simple. So if you mix one more Shear secret into the chaining key material, then attackers with a powerful quantum computer in the future cannot recover the chaining key material anymore. But it relies on the assumption that the pre-share key is not leaked throughout its lifetime, which is, in my opinion, rather unrealistic, especially the case when you have a commercial VPN service provider. Donenfeld claimed that post-quantum cryptography is not practical for use in his paper. So he only put an optional pre-share key into the protocol, and we will show that this is not the case. So is key confidentiality the best we can do in the post-quantum world? This is, of course, not the case. But we would like to keep all the security properties of Wireguard while maintaining its one round-trip design. In addition, we would like to avoid packet fragmentation because it causes problems, including having to deal with firewall filtering. This means that we have a packet size constraint of 1280 bytes imposed by IPv6. And because Wireguard operates on top of UDP, the size of the actual payload is at most 1232 bytes. And if we exclude the header and other stuff that Wireguard needs, then we only have around 1100 bytes for the post-quantum stuff. This is more than sufficient, however, to achieve NIST security level 1. And which is roughly the security strength of AES 128. But we would like challenges, and it would be a good idea to keep some security margins, given the fact that some post-quantum cryptography is still not well understood. So we would like to aim for a NIST security level 3. So to migrate to the post-quantum world, a straightforward approach is, well, we simply replace X25519 with some isogeny-based skins and we are done. But this is not a good idea for now, for several reasons. First, isogeny-based skins are not known for its efficiency. Second, the security of isogeny-based schemes are still being investigated, and for some, it's under heavy debate. So when we designed post-quantum Wireguard, we took a different approach. We decided to replace the original particle based on Diffie-Hellman with one based on CAMs. In particular, with long-term key pair is replaced with IND-CCS secure CAM, and the ephemeral key pair is replaced with IND-CPS secure CAM. This approach has a drawback. That is, there's no replacement for the Diffie-Hellman result of the long-term key pairs. What does that mean? Well, on the left-hand side is how the 4 shear secrets were derived in the original Wireguard particle. I recall that the static Diffie-Hellman result plays an important role in unknown key shear attack resistance and dose mitigation. And if we use the CAM-based particle, which is on the right-hand side, we do not derive shear secrets in the same manner as before. So instead of combining a public key and a secret key to derive a shear secret, a fresh random secret is encapsulated into a ciphertext with a public key, and later decapsulated with the corresponding secret key. It's a completely different mechanism. So we can no longer derive a shear secret value by simply looking at a long-term, looking at 2 long-term keys. This is a problem, and we will discuss shortly how we can fix it. And in addition to switching to the CAM-based particle, we also changed a few things. In the original Wireguard particle, the long-term public key is transferred in the first handshake packet. This is necessary because the initiator needs to identify herself to the responder. And transferring the whole public key is not an option for many post-quantum CAMs because their size. Therefore, in post-quantum Wireguard, we simply transfer the hash value of the long-term public key. And if you remember that the implicit key confirmation in the original particle was a sore spot for proving its security, we added explicitly a key confirmation from the initiator to the responder to address this issue. So this extra key confirmation can actually be sent at the same time as the encrypted data. So the performance impact is essentially negligible, and we will see shortly. This figure shows how the new particle works in action. First, the initiator generates an ephemeral CAM key pair. And in addition, she encapsulates a fresh secret with the long-term public key of the responder. She sends the ephemeral public key together with the ciphertext to the responder. And this fresh secret encapsulated in the ciphertext is used to bind the second handshake packets to the first one. In addition, it's used to authenticate the responder. And when the responder receives both, he would decapsulate the secret and generate the second handshake packet based on that. In this packet, he will include 2 ciphertexts generated by encapsulating another 2 fresh secrets, respectively with the ephemeral public key that he just received and the long-term public key of the initiator. At the end of the handshake, both parties will have 3 shear secrets, and they are mixed into the chaining key material. Okay, and we did some analysis of this CAM-based particle, and it turns out that all but 3 of the original security properties are achieved already, which is quite nice. The missing ones are key confidentiality when the random number generator is compromised. Strictly speaking, this is a new attack that we added to the threat model because Wireguard does not consider a compromised random number generator, and it achieves no security when the random number generator is compromised. And for post-quantum Wireguard, we would like to add a line of defense in this scenario. And recall that we just talked about how the Diffie-Hellman result of the long-term key pairs was mixed into the chaining key material to prevent unknown key share attacks. And because we no longer have Diffie-Hellman, unknown key share attacks become possible. And finally, because the same Diffie-Hellman result is used to authenticate the first handshake packets, we will lose DOS mitigation as well. So to solve those issues, we took the following approaches. To retain key confidentiality, even when the random number generator is compromised, we generate all randomness used by post-quantum Wireguard with a pseudo-random function. The key of the pseudo-random function is a new long-term secret that we introduced, while the input to the pseudo-random function is the output of the random number generator. In practice, the long-term secret for the pseudo-random function can be stored on a hardware token, for example, a smart card. To address the unknown key share attack resistance, we combine the long-term public keys of both parties, hash the results, and we set the default pre-share key to this hash value. This effectively binds the chaining key material to both parties. Alternatively, one can also just mix the long-term public keys of both parties into the chaining key material. We didn't do this because we would like to stay as close as possible to the original Wireguard. And to mitigate DOS attack, one can send up a non-default pre-share key, which is not known to the attackers. And this pre-share key would be used often to authenticate the first handshake packets. And this essentially achieves the same functionality as the Diffie-Hellman results of the long-term X25519 key pairs. And after we finalize the post-quantum Wireguard particle, we prove its security in pretty much the same fashion as the original Wireguard. In particular, we extended Dowling and Peterson's work by allowing the attacker to be quantum polynomial time algorithms in the ECK PFS PSK model. And we proved the security of post-quantum Wireguard with it. And in addition to the computational model, we also extended Donenfeld and Milner's work to allow the attacker to compromise random number generators. And we cover all security properties. And with the particle fix, we can instantiate it with some post-quantum camps. But what should we pick? Recall that we would like to achieve NIST security level 3. So we took a look at the NIST INDCCA secure camps at that time. And we realized that class and mechanism is the best choice for the long-term camp. A slow key generation and large public key sizes do not matter because the long-term key is only generated once and distributed when sending out the VPN. In addition, its ciphertext size is pretty small and has efficient constant time encapsulation and decapsulation. Another advantage is that class and mechanism is arguably the most well-studied post-quantum cryptography, and it's considered the most conservative one. And with class and mechanism fixed, we took a look at the remaining space in both packets, and there's only around 900 bytes left for the ephemeral CAN. And because the ephemeral CAN is generated on the fly, its key generation latency matters. And the only good news is that because it's ephemeral, we only need an IND CPA secure CAN. To sum up, we need an IND CPA secure CAN that is relatively secure, has fast constant time key generation, encapsulation, and decapsulation. And finally, its public key and ciphertext needs to be small enough. And that's quite something to ask for. So we take a look at the NIST security level 3 CAN candidates, and none of them met those criteria. In the end, we decided to do the following. We picked the Saber, which is a lattice-based CAN, and we tweaked it. Specifically, we dropped the Fujisaki Okamoto transformation because we don't need CCA security anymore. In addition, we further compress its public key and ciphertext to make them even smaller. And this compression has a nice side effect that we actually reduce the amount of information in the public key and the ciphertext, which makes the underlying lattice problem even more difficult. And consequently, this tweaked version, which we conveniently call Saber Dagger because it's a smaller Saber, it has a higher security strength than the original proposal. And one caveat is that Dagger has a much higher failure probability because of the compression. Failure probability for decapsulation. And this is about 1 in a million, but for post-quantum Wireguard, this failure probability should not matter because it has the same effect as a lost UDP packet. Okay, so we went ahead and we implemented our instantiation as a Linux kernel module. Both classic Macaleese and Dagger were implemented to have constant time operations. We then evaluated its performance in a 10 gigabit per second network between two virtual machines. We use the amount of traffic, the number of packets, and the latency as matrix to compare its performance with other VPN software, including the original Wireguard, OpenVPN, IPsec, and PQCryptoVPN. PQCryptoVPN is a project from Microsoft that built on top of OpenVPN to provide post-quantum security. And this is the result. As you can see, our post-quantum WireGuard performs 5 times faster than IPsec, even when it uses X25519, and 1,000 times faster than any OpenVPN variants. And post-quantum WireGuard is only slower than the original WireGuard, which is roughly 1.7 times slower on the client side and 1.6 times slower on the server side. We transmit more traffic because post-quantum public keys and ciphertext are larger, but that is not why post-quantum WireGuard runs slower than the original WireGuard. In our experiments, the bottleneck of both WireGuard and post-quantum WireGuard is actually public key crypto operations. So we will expect that further optimization of the post-quantum crypto implementation can further close down this performance gap. And this is the end of my talk, and thank you for your attention. And for your convenience, I include links to our paper and the software here. If you have any questions, I will be happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Kai. It was a really interesting talk. So I will open the floor to any questions regarding WireGuard. Well, I have one question, but it's a little bit unrelated. I really like that this is one of the few, when I read initially the paper, I was really happy because it's one of the few applications of, in the real world, of classic Mac-Alice. Do you think, because it fit nicely into the WireGuard protocol, do you think it could be used in other places as well?
I think it's possible, yes. Like there's a recent paper like called CanTOS. So actually the follow-up of CanTOS, basically they are making this assumption that the public key of the server is cached like on the client side. In that case, you could do something with it. And it will be exactly the same situation as WireGuard here, where you have the public keys in store. So like, yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's a very interesting proposal as well. When it's indeed cached, then it's true, because you don't need to send these gigantic public keys. So definitely something to look into. And what other, did you ever like actually talk to the WireGuard developers, authors, and if they would like to be interested in actually pursuing a post-quantum version of the protocol in like the actual deployability environment?
Yes, we talked with the creator of WireGuard, Jason Donenfeld, but like it was sometime early in the project, and at that time they were busy with merging their project into Linux, mainline Linux kernel, which means that any changes to the code base would be, let's say, like not very welcome to say the least. Okay, and afterwards, like they merged and like we published a paper, but like we have not picked up contacts since then.